And I'm Matt. So glad you could join us on this Shabbat or whatever day you are watching this message. We're glad that you're hanging with us as we continue through our series, Blood Brothers, the story of the sons of Jacob. Every family has a story, and some of those stories include betrayal and jealousy, favoritism, silent pain, and reconciliation that seems impossible. But that's good, because the family that God chose to tell his story through is just as complicated as ours. And in the story today, we're going to see God weave redemption through the messiness in a message called From Messy to Mercy. So last week, we kind of started a little mini-series within this Blood Brothers series on chapter 38 of Genesis. What seems like an interruption into the Joseph narrative is actually the beginning of the rise of Judah as one who will lead the family and the line that will produce King David and ultimately Yeshua, our Messiah. Judah descends. Last week he descended from the Judean hills to the Canaanite plains, away from God physically, morally, and spiritually. And we watched him consume rather than covenant. He used people to numb his guilt and his shame. And today we wait with Judah and Shelah and Tamar to see if he will keep his promise to wait until Shelah comes of age so that he can give Tamar to him as a wife. Judah has already lost 2 sons last week and fears losing the third. And so Judah seeks to soothe himself while Tamar remains patient. It all sets the stage for a collision of false comfort and righteous strategy. God will expose Judah's false self and invite him and us into confession that transforms shame into integrity. So you can open with me to Genesis 38 and verse 12. It says, "Now the days became many, and Shua's daughter, Judah's wife, died. After Judah consoled himself, he went up to Timnah to his sheep shearers, he and his friend Hirah the Adullamite." Now, the days are many means it's enough time that Shelah is now old enough to be married, and Judah's unnamed wife has died. Now, they're going to a sheep shearing festival, and sheep shearing festivals were culturally sanctioned times to seek pleasure and celebration. The work is done, so you have a holiday and you celebrate, a harvest celebration with lavish feasting and generosity expected and cultural permission for abundance. The sheep shearing festival is the perfect escape. It's full of feasting and wine to numb Judah's grief. And this is how he consoles himself. It says Judah consoled himself. The word for comfort or console is important in Hebrew. It's the word nacham in Hebrew, and it means to be satisfied. But Judah's not satisfied. If he were, he would not be going to get drunk and to find a prostitute. So he comforts himself by going with his buddy Hirah, which means, his name means brightness. We talked about this last week. To Timnah, which means pleasant or delight. In English, the sentence would actually say, brightness and praise, Hirah and Judah, brightness and praise went to pleasant to party. This is the same word nacham. The word for comfort was used for his father Jacob, who needed to be comforted at the loss of Joseph in chapter 37. There, Jacob refused comfort and chose to stay in mourning that will last for 20 years. But here, Judah seeks comfort immediately in feasting and wine and distraction. Judah was wookin' panub in all the wrong paces, wookin' panub. In doing so, he set up a moment where shame will meet confession. Watch Genesis 38 verse 13. It says, "Then Tamar was told, 'Look, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his flocks.' And she removed her widow clothes from herself, and she covered herself with the veil, wrapped herself, and sat by the entrance to the springs on the way to Timnah. For she saw that Shelah had grown up, and she had not been given to him as a wife. So Judah is consoling himself while Tamar endures the grief that Judah has caused. Her suffering is a direct consequence of his broken promises. She's still in her widow's clothes because Judah has failed to give her what's rightfully hers, a husband in Shelah. Now, it's true that in the ancient world, widows were vulnerable. They lacked property and social safety nets. But here, the injustice is personal. Judah's avoidance of his own issues leaves Tamar stuck in prolonged grief that she shouldn't be in. Here's the pattern. When we try to soothe ourselves through false comfort, we perpetuate our own shame and the harm we cause others. God exposes these deceptions not to punish, but to call us towards confession and integrity. The name of the place that she's sitting is important because it's missed in the English. It's called the entrance to the springs on the way to Timnah. The phrase in Hebrew is Patach Anayim, which is the opening of the eyes. The NIV actually translates the name of the place. It transliterates Anayim. Tamar positions herself at Anayim, which means opening of the eyes. And it echoes the first deception in the Garden of Eden. The snake said to Eve in Genesis chapter 3 and verse 5, "For God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." This is the same Hebrew words that are found here in Genesis 3 verse 5, but also in Genesis 38 for the place that Tamar sits. The serpent in Eden sought destruction using disguise to open human eyes to pain and separation from God. But in Genesis 38, deception, which is a tool of seduction, becomes actually a tool of justice, turning desire into a path towards confession. And the one who deceived his father, Judah, and avoided responsibility is now deceived with his eyes because he sees her but fails to recognize Tamar for who she truly is. Verse 15, it says, "When Judah saw her with his eyes that are open, but not really, he thought she was a prostitute because she had covered her face." Judah, likely drunk from the party, can see, but remains blind to the pain that he causes other people as he seeks false comfort. He's trying to heal himself, believing that nothing is broken, when actually, on the inside, everything is broken. Seeking comfort in avoidance perpetuates shame. But God exposes our deception to invite confession and integrity. True restoration comes when we stop defending the false self, face our failures, and allow God to work through courage and faithfulness, turning victims into agents of redemption. Verse 16. So he turned aside to her along the way and said, "Please let me sleep with you," for he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. "What will you give me to sleep with me?" she said. Now, like earlier in the chapter, when it talks about Judah's unnamed wife, the Hebrew says, "Let me go into you." It's crass on purpose because it's showing Judah's drunken, unconscious, wounded false self. He is soothing pain in all the wrong ways. He's seeking false comfort through food, alcohol, and sex while ignoring the brokenness within. And Tamar responds with, what will you give me? Which would be the normal question of a prostitute, but it's not really what she's asking. Verse 17, he says, "I will send you a young goat from the flock." And she said, "Provided you give a pledge until you send it, like give me something to hold until you actually bring the goat." And there are plenty of young goats available because it's a shearing party. But a young goat also represents an offering or a sacrifice. You remember in chapter 37 when the brothers, led by Judah, killed a goat and dipped Joseph's robe in the blood and told their father that he was killed by an evil animal. Now, Judah is using a young goat to purchase false comfort, not knowing that everything about this situation hinges on his lack of integrity. He deceived his father with the blood of a goat. Now he's trying to deceive with a goat again. The same tool, the same deception, different disguise. The deceiver is about to be deceived. Verse 18, it says, he asked, what kind of pledge shall I give you? And she said, your seal, your cord, and your staff in your hand. So he gave them to her and slept with her, and she got pregnant by him. Well, that escalated quickly. Okay, the pledge is a down payment, eravon. It's collateral. It's something in place of another thing. This is a sacrificial animal, is what he's pledging, but he gives her something in place of that thing until he can bring it. It's a substitute, but it's a false substitute. And Tamar says, well, I want your seal, your cord, and the staff in your hand. Now, the seal and the cord and the staff in their hand, for us, first of all, they represent Judah's very self, his identity. In our day, it would be like your ID, your wallet, and your keys. The seal is his personal mark of identity and authority, like his signature that hung on a necklace, a cord that held it around his neck. The staff symbolizes leadership, but staffs were also used for royal lines that we know God will promise through Judah later in the book of Genesis. What Judah thinks is an anonymous transaction. He unknowingly, he's pledging his identity, his authority, and his legacy. Judah treats this as a simple transaction, a deal, but every compromise carries a cost to integrity. And this moment sets the stage for God to expose him and call him back to confession. Just like his uncle Esau, who also married a Canaanite, now his uncle Esau sold his birthright for a bowl of soup. Now Judah is willing to give everything that defines him to console himself with food, alcohol, and sex, false comfort. The personal takeaway for us is, what are you pledging? Every choice, every compromise, a relationship carries a cost. Are you trading integrity for success? Maybe you're trading your marriage for a moment, or your character for acceptance. What are you willing to give, and at what price? So it says, he gave them to her, and he slept with her, and she got pregnant by him. It's funny because these stories are full of uncomfortable situations and behaviors. And sometimes, for some reason, we look at the Bible as if the people in the Bible were okay with whatever happens in the Bible. But they're not. They are just as uncomfortable with a father-in-law impregnating his daughter-in-law as we are in our culture. But this is also the depths to which Judah was running from his identity, from his fathers, and from the God of his fathers. And at the expense of those he had the responsibility to take care of and to keep his word to. So after she got up and left, and she removed her veil from herself and put on her widow's clothes, and when Judah sent the young goat by the hand of his friend the Adullamite to take back the pledge from the woman's hand, he could not find her. And he asked the men of the area, where's the cult prostitute? She was at Enaim, the springs along the way. But they said, there's no cult prostitute here. So he returned to Judah and he said, look, bro, I tried to find her. And the people of that place said, there hasn't been a cult prostitute here. Now, let's just pause for a second and understand the irony and the setting here. The word here is kedashah, which is a sacred woman, meaning a woman involved in Canaanite fertility worship. Earlier, the narrator uses the word zona in Hebrew, which is a common prostitute. But Judah's friend doesn't ask the people for a prostitute. He says to the locals, where is the sacred woman at Enaim? Which tells us that this spot, Enaim, was already known as a place where Canaanite ritual sex was practiced. And this is worship that Judah, as a son of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, should be avoiding entirely, but he engages without hesitation. The story highlights how far Judah has drifted from the God of his family. And here's the irony. Tamar, a Canaanite, positions herself at a site of corrupt worship and uses the symbols of that system not to seduce, but to bring justice, to secure the family line and expose Judah's lack of integrity. Verse 23, it says, then Judah said, let her take them for herself or we'll be held in contempt because, I sent the young goat, but you couldn't find her. He's saying, I kept my pledge. I tried to send it to her. I tried to send her a goat, but she wasn't there. And Judah doesn't seem concerned that someone out there has his ID, his wallet, and his keys. But this is where we see Judah's real priority. He's not concerned about finding this woman or making things right. What he's concerned about is what people will think. He'd rather write off his own identity than face the judgment of others. So Judah shows what shame does, and it does it for us too. Shame isolates and silences and makes us sacrifice what matters to maintain an image. This is shame-driven living. We hide instead of confess. We cover up instead of come clean. We lose ourselves in the process. How many of us would rather lose what matters than face the judgment of others? We live in silent shame. We maintain false images. We fake it till we make it. We disconnect from community to protect our reputation. And in doing so, we lose ourselves. It says in verse 24, about 3 months later, Judah was told, your daughter-in-law, Tamar, has been a prostitute. Look, she's even pregnant by prostitution. Bring her out, Judah said, and let her be burned. Burn, baby, burn. Disco Inferno. Okay, Tamar is reduced once again to just a prostitute. And Judah immediately demands the harshest penalty. Burn her alive. No questions, no inquiry, no search for the truth, just a snap judgment. In his mind, her pregnancy is proof that she has sinned against him and his family, and that's all he needs. Burn her. Verse 25. As she was being brought out, she sent word to her father-in-law, I'm pregnant by the man who these things belong. Do you recognize whose these are? The seal, the cords, and the staff? Then Judah recognized them and said, she's more righteous than I, since I didn't give her to my son, Shelah. He was not intimate with her again. Watch the wording here. Do you recognize these? And Judah recognized them. The word recognized in Hebrew is the word nakar. It is the same word used when Judah and his brothers deceived their father. Do you recognize this bloody coat, they said to their father, and then Jacob recognized it, is what the text says. It's also the same word when later in the story, Joseph will recognize his brothers in Egypt, but they do not recognize him. It's a word that carries through the entire narrative. The word recognize in Hebrew bookends the deception. The first time it leads to a never-ending mourning for Jacob. The second time it leads to confession of sin for Judah. Same Hebrew word, different outcome, different response. So won't the real Judah please stand up? Please stand up. The exposure is complete. The condemned becomes the judge, and the deceiver has been deceived. And finally, really for the first time, Judah does the right thing. Verse 26, again, he says, she is more righteous than I. Righteous is a strange word in our culture and in English, but simply Judah recognizes that Tamar is more right than he is. He could have argued. He could have said, oh, come on, she dressed like a prostitute and tricked me. That's not fair. Instead, he looked squarely at his own deception, his own dishonesty, and the failure to act with integrity, and admits it. He was caught. 3 words that change everything. She is righteous. He doesn't minimize his sin. He doesn't blame circumstances. He just confesses, I was wrong, she was right. And in that moment, he stops the pattern. And that's why the text says he was not intimate with her again. This is more than Judah admitting sin. This is Judah's real self emerging. This is moving from messy to mercy. For years, he's lived from this false self that was built on anger and avoidance and false comforts. But he has finally told the truth. The illusion is broken. Confession didn't crush him. It revealed who he actually was and cleared space for integrity to grow. He could have denied and condemned her. Instead, he spoke the hardest words for somebody with pride can say. She's right. I'm wrong. And this is the hinge that opens the door. God exposes Judah's deception, and his confession turned shame into integrity and marked the emergence of his true self, all because of a righteous Canaanite woman who cared more for Judah's line than he did, and her name means palm tree because she's a tree of life in a dying family. Judah's confession shows the start of this emergence of his real self. In the same way, when we confess, God's love begins to reveal where we've hidden behind false selves, reshaping us into patience, kindness, and self-forgiveness. Tremper Longman said in his commentary, remember that God can use the difficulties and pain of life to accomplish his purpose through you and for you. Living from the real self, centered in God's love, is a lifelong journey. It doesn't happen in an instant. Probably the most famous definition of love comes from the New Testament in what some call the love chapter, 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 4. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not brag. It is not puffed up. It does not behave inappropriately. It does not seek its own way. It is not provoked. It keeps no record of wrong. It does not rejoice over injustice, but rejoices in truth. It bears all things. It believes all things. It hopes all things. It endures all things. That's a tough definition. And these are not just instructions for loving other people, but it's a blueprint for learning to love yourself, to live with integrity, and to put away the coping mechanisms of the false self. That's why Paul says after his definition of love in verse 11, he says, look, when I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. And when I became a man, I put away childish things. Now, when we die and we go to be with the Lord, at the end of all things, we will fully understand love. But for now, in this one life that we get to live, Paul continues in verse 12. He says, for now, we see in a mirror dimly, but then we will see face to face. Now I know in part, but then I will know fully, even as I have been fully known. But now, in this life, before that happens, there are these three remain: faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is love. Paul is reminding us that transformation takes time, probably more time than you want it to take. And just as it took Judah years, about 20, from selling Joseph to finally, we'll see sometime in the new year, we'll see him stepping up for Benjamin, where he'll actually live with integrity. But we also have to learn over time how to live these ways of love out. And confession is the hinge. It frees the real self to begin breathing, to take responsibility, and to step into God's love for yourself and then for others. Mr. Rogers said it this way: whatever is mentionable is manageable. And these are words that I have, they're on my desk, and I've tried to shape my life around them the last few years. Naming what is hidden is the first step to letting God's love transform you. This love settles over time, and it reshapes our hearts and our minds. It equips us to carry our failures and endure the consequences of our false selves, and ultimately love others with integrity and faithfulness. This is the ongoing work of God's grace, using our brokenness to kill the false self and bring the real self to life, a new birth into the person that God designed us to be. You cannot keep the Torah command to love your neighbor as yourself if you do not love yourself. So I want to encourage you this week, maybe even now, as we finish this message, and you just sit and read 1 Corinthians 13 to yourself. And as you read about Paul's definition of love, ask the question, do I love myself this way? Can I love others this way? Is this what love looks like in my life? Confession lays down the false self and frees the real you to rise into the life that God designed from death to resurrection. Grace enters, shame recedes, and God's love transforms your heart and your mind from messy to mercy. You are empowered to live with integrity, to love yourself well, and to love others faithfully. In the name of Yeshua. And you got to come back next week, because we're going to wrap up the story of Judah and Tamar and talk about the line of David and the book of Ruth and Yeshua the Messiah in Matthew chapter 1 before we get back to the Joseph narrative in the rest of the end of Genesis. I love you guys and can't wait to see you next week.